What are you training for?
Life.
Welcome to Train for Life, a podcast brought to you by ISI Elite Training. I'm Adam Rice, founder and CEO, and we'll be hosting this alongside Amanda Hall, our COO. Tune in weekly as we explore topics on personal and professional development to help you level up in all aspects of your life. We call this Training for Life.
All right, today on this episode, we are talking about leadership, but specifically the topic is you can't lead a life you don't live. When we kind of dive underneath that, I'm curious, Adam, what you feel like it is to lead a life, almost the opposite of that. What is it to lead a life that you want to live?
Yeah. This is actually where I first had this quote was in my garage gym. I had it up there as an inspiration to, for my kids, like for me as a dad, right? And so naturally, I think the inclination with that is you hear it and you're like, yeah, for sure, when it comes down to like parenting.
Right.
But I know specifically we really wanted to talk about, and this is completely relevant to parenting, leadership, whatever. Anybody you're trying to influence or lead, I think the idea here is, to me, it comes down to credibility. You can't lead, like if we break it down, you can't lead someone if you're not doing those things, right? And it's common sense, but oftentimes we see so many leaders trying to ask people to do things that they're not willing to do, don't know how to do, or never did do, right? And I think that's what it comes down to is building that credibility. And once you do that, then you have the ability to influence and move people in the direction that they want to move. And a prime example of this is, we're in the fitness industry. So how about a completely overweight coach trying to tell you that doesn't get in any workouts at ISI, trying to say, I need you here 4 days a week. You lost all credibility. No one's going to listen to you. It does not matter how smart you are or the wisdom that you have. You have to lead by example when it comes down to that. So I'm going to kick this back to you. I'm going to ask you this. Give me an example of it. I was going to ask this. Give me an example of a time in your life where you saw someone trying to lead a life that they weren't living, and really the outcome or the result of that. So whether it was in a department with a director, maybe another parent that you may have known.
Honestly, I see this happen in ownership. Just working across several brands, and we talk oftentimes when we're talking to potential candidates who want to own even an ISI, but right. So I'll go across 3 different brands. Oftentimes a question we get asked is, and we get this in Iron U a lot too, is, what makes the best location successful?
Right.
And it is very evident the best locations are successful because of leadership. So if I put it in those shoes, like watching a location that isn't getting the results they want, and oftentimes, that conversation can come, and this isn't necessarily related to ISI, but it has happened where, like, I can't get my team to do X, Y, and Z, right? And my job is to ask the questions to figure out what are they doing to try to get the team to do it. And oftentimes the gap falls between they're asking their team to do something that they haven't been willing to do or they don't do themselves.
Right.
I want my team to be more bought in. Okay, well, how bought in are you?
Right.
How many, and I'll just reference this in the fitness terms, right? So for us, if you own a facility, it's how many sessions are you taking?
Right.
How often are you posting and shouting out your team if you want them to shout out each other? I always say, like, a culture of recognition is built at the top. So if you're not, everything that you want, to me, happens as a result of what you give.
Right.
So if you want something, as a leader, you have to give it. If you wanted this is even personal. If you wanted recognition or affirmation, you better give recognition and affirmation to the person you want it from, because they're going to want to give it back. So I think leading by example is the same thing. And that goes back to that credibility. And I've watched that happen across multiple brands where the top isn't building that credibility up with their team, and what they want, the outcome they want, isn't happening.
Right.
because they're not leading by example. I also think too, you can tell when we went back to future episodes of somebody, if you go back and listen to, I think it was our second one on confidence,
Yep.
and part of confidence is making decisions and being committed to something and delivering on it. I think leading by example, you'll notice that you'll doubt yourself as a leader,
Right.
right?
Yep.
I'll be curious. This is my question back to you. Do you feel that there are people who get in leadership roles and they just aren't willing to do the work to, like, when we talk about, leading by example or doing those things for credibility, what do you think holds somebody back from doing that?
It's interesting. I see so many people get put into new leadership roles because they were good at doing the doing of their former role. And it's radically different to go from someone who is self-producing and doing a hell of a job and overperforming to then leading someone else who's self-producing. It's very different skill set. And so oftentimes I see it a lot in even our own facilities where the obvious or the common sense thing that you would think is this person's the absolute best coach. We're going to make them our head coach, which rightfully so in a lot of cases makes the most sense. But then in other cases, if this coach isn't a good leader, can't do the schedule, can't deliver to deadlines, they're just a great coach, then they're not going to be a good head performance coach, right? And so I think when it comes down to that, I think it's less about someone not willing to do the work and more so not having the capacity to do it. Because we always talk about it when we're hiring. The
Right.
GWC from the EOS model is, do they get it? Do they want it? Do they have the capacity for it? And oftentimes I think the thing is, like, you don't know if someone has the capacity until you actually put them in the seat. And therefore, from a leadership perspective, your team's always looking at you to be decisive, right? And we talk about it all the time, is like not doing something, not making a decision is actually communicating something. You're always communicating something as a leader. If you show up 20 minutes late, you're communicating something as a leader. Your body language, you're showing something. You're communicating always in how we do things. And so if someone is in that seat and they've been elevated to that seat, but they don't get it, they don't want it, or they don't have the capacity for it, then ultimately they're not going to have the credibility to the people they're leading, and they're going to lose that trust, and therefore they're not going to be able to move the needle in that department or in that business or whatever it is. And so I think it can be a combination, but oftentimes newly elevated leaders, it's trying to what's it, the old saying of putting a round peg in a square hole or
Right.
something like that.
I always say, in the form of leadership, you do a job before you get a job. So if you're going to move somebody from an individual leadership role, contributor, which I want to ask you a question about that in a minute, but if you're going to move them from a leadership role of I'm a leader in my own role and position to a leader of people, if they don't already lead people, the likelihood to me that they're going to be very successful, that is very slim. If you don't see that natural leadership of people happening from an influence, and I mean, no one stops you from, I say, do a job before you get a job, find a way to do the next job that you want. Anybody who's above you is going to love for you to take more on, but you're doing it in preparation for building that ability to step into it. So you're already living into that role. So thinking about leadership, and I know we're saying you can't live a life you don't lead, or you can't lead a life you don't live. Sorry. Right. I don't think you have to be a leader of people to be a leader.
Agree.
And that's in your role. That's in anything you're, as a leader in your family, a leader in your life individually, like feeling like you're a leader in your life. And I definitely would say this plays into your role that you contribute to in a team.
Yep.
So what does that look like if we take it away from maybe the credibility with people, from that report to you, to just leading your life, and how that can impact it? Like, how do you feel that an individual does that for themselves?
I think it goes back to confidence, right? Because the root word of confidence is con, so with, and then fide, which is trust, so trusting in yourself. And so if you're oftentimes when we're leading ourselves, it's to the next version of ourselves, right? So like, why do we Why do you get up at 5 a.m.? It's because you want to grow and you want to get to the next level of yourself. And so you're essentially leading yourself in that direction. So if you, like you said in the previous episode, if you hit that snooze alarm and you don't show up and you're not committed to doing the things you said you did, then you're not leading a life that essentially, or you're not living a life that you want to lead. Right. So I think it's weird in this way of like, I think there's two versions of us always. There's who we are today, who we want to be. And there's this evolution of what happens. And so if you look from a leadership standpoint, because I know you gave a prime, I mean, you and I were talking the other day, and Nick Day is in retail, right? He doesn't have anyone that directly reports to him. But I'll let you dive into that, and because he's not quote unquote a leader of a team, but
I asked him kind of what that next level looks like, and obviously for him, he wants to lead that department and lead a team. So my question to him was, do you feel like you have to lead a team to be a leader?
Right.
And we really dove underneath that.
Yeah.
And when I challenged him with, if I were to ask anybody, not just even in our headquarters office, but in our brand,
right.
Our franchise partners, facility managers, who is over retail as a department? If I said, who is the head of the department for retail, what would they say? And it was interesting because when we were talking about it, he didn't really correlate that to himself.
Right.
But they would.
Yep.
So, it was, I think it was eye-opening for him, but also, I wanted him to see that you do have that ability to be that leader without direct reports underneath you. It's really having, and it goes back to also extreme ownership in a role that I'm going to own all these components of it and I'm going to lead it, to its fullest. So, yeah, I mean, I think, I don't think that you have to have leadership really does come down to, if you don't have the capacity to lead people or the desire, there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean you're not a leader.
Yep.
It doesn't mean you shouldn't step into the things that you want to achieve in your life and deliver and own it and put yourself on it. I think, what would you say to someone who feels misaligned? And I think this could be a seasonal thing in life, or whatever you're going through, but we're talking about living a life that you'd want to lead, or there's both sides to that. So if you feel misaligned with that, how would you come back to circle to live the life that you want?
Yeah. I mean, I think it starts with, I would think, like, telling the freaking truth, right? Like, do I really love what I'm doing? Or did I want to, am I leading people and I don't like it? Right? Because of maybe my deficiencies, because of maybe my gaps, or maybe because, like, I am truly someone who likes to self-produce and, like, be in that zone, but my ego or society's telling me that for me to be in that next level of my career, then I technically have to hold this title or this label. And ultimately, so many people step into that component or that job title or that label because it inherently it's stroking their ego, or they think that's the next step, when ultimately, like, they could continue to provide value at where they're at. But again, that comes down to, like, your level of happiness too, right? And so I think from that side of things, if you're unaligned, you have to tell the truth and say, ask that question, am I aligned? Do I enjoy what I'm doing every day? And then you have to say, is it truly because of it, or is there a gap in knowledge, right? Because that's uncomfortable. If you have a gap in knowledge, or you haven't been there before, you're outside your comfort zone, then that's fine. But as long as you're putting in the work and shortening that gap, and we've talked about in other episodes, getting around people that are going to help you collapse that timeline,
right? And
really leading with humility, leading with drive, leading with all those characteristics, then your team, you're going to have credibility. It's not about how much you know. To me, it's not about how much you know as a leader. Credibility is based upon asking the right questions, making sure people feel seen and heard, and then ultimately leading with humility. When you make it your team's idea, they'll take more ownership in it naturally, right? So I think you have to ask that. Let's wrap with this. Relationally, so whether it's in a marriage, boyfriend, girlfriend, friends, brother, sister, what does that look like in you can't lead a life you don't live? Meaning, let's just talk marriage. Let's just talk husband, wife. We all want our significant other to act a certain way or be a certain way or whatever it is. And typically it's probably more like us when that's really not necessarily
not the right thing.
Yeah.
Right.
So what does that look like? Because I think people can identify really easily with what that looks like in a kid, but how does that look like, in your opinion, inside a relationship?
I honestly don't think that you lead each other in a marriage or relationship. I think that is individual, meaning you need to be committed to living that life that you have, and then you come together. I think the ability to, yes, are there things that you're supporting each other in and needs of each other? 100%. But I think when we talk about leading a life you can't live, if you have to lead yourself, you have to become the best version of yourself.
Right.
You have to do that work on yourself. Do you want to share that with your spouse? Do you want to share that with them so they can cheer you on? Absolutely.
Right.
But at the same time, I think, from my perspective, I don't want to be married to myself.
Right.
Honestly.
Right. Yeah.
I really don't.
Yeah.
And beyond that, I also want that person to, thrive in whatever it is that they really want for their life. So to me, that's an individual thing. So, are there things that we commit to that you have to show up in a relationship? And, you have to have aligned goals, I think, and vision and you both have to want some things that are similar. That vision, that bigger vision does have to be in alignment, or it's going to be off.
Yep.
But at the same time, I think from how you individually show up and lead a life that you want to live, you have to be growing individually in those things that are really important to you. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's a bigger picture. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I see it.
Because I think a lot of people think that they have to lead their spouse, and especially men, right? Because whether you talk biblically or whatever, just the notion of men, you need to lead your households. And I think when it comes down to that, we have to. I heard it on Jay Shetty's podcast. He said your purpose should always be number one. Obviously, your faith, God, but when it comes down to the fundamentals of any relationship, whether it's marriage, boyfriend or girlfriend, or whatever it is, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it is, you have to fundamentally, number one priority is your purpose. Because if you're not in alignment with your purpose, then how's your cup essentially going to be filled to then provide and come together, right, on that? And I think it's so interesting because I think society tells us that we need to lead. And ultimately, I think leadership in that is the best way you can lead your spouse. And I think it goes both ways. I don't think it's a man or a woman thing. I think it's you lead yourself, right? Which makes yourself a better version, which, again, both people have to continue to evolve and grow together. Because if one outgrows, meaning is so focused on personal development and growing and is driven, but the other one's not, then there's going to be an unalignment, right? And that kind of lends towards your bigger vision of, kind of if you could say that maybe core values of your marriage or whatever it is, just a common theme that we're both aligned on this.
Right.
Because I think it's interesting when it comes down to that, because I do think a lot of people think I need to lead in that. And the reality is we need to lead ourselves better. And we talk about the two versions of ourselves. So anything else that you want to or comes to mind before we wrap this episode?
No, I mean, I think a takeaway would really be to dig underneath, what is the life you want to live and how are you leading it? Start with yourself. Yeah. And then if you're a leader of people, man, I think there's a lot to be gained. And I know I go back to this a lot, but asking the people that you lead how well you're doing. I always like to say, what do you need more of from me? What do you need less of from me? How do they feel underneath your leadership? For one, hopefully you have a good enough pulse on it. Right. Make an anonymous survey if you want. I don't know. Yeah. Or ask a few people you lead that you trust if you don't have that open relationship. But if you can really hear feedback from others, it'll give you a good pulse on, I'm always thinking when I feel like there's a gap or a sense of any gap, whether it's in this leadership, is how am I contributing to that? Mm-hmm. And what should I be doing different? Right. And that really goes back to, am I delivering on the commitments I've made to my team or to their needs? Am Am I leading by example? All those questions. So I would just say the takeaway from this would be, for one, look at yourself individually. What's that life that you want to live, and are you leading towards it? Go back and listen to the past episodes on characteristics, habits, because I think they all really will resonate with this. And then also, if you're a leader of people, dive underneath that and take time. It's good. Twice a year, you should be evaluating. How are you doing? What are you doing really well? What are you not? And then what do you need to put in place to build on that for you and your team? So,
love that. All right, guys, that's a wrap for this episode. We will see you on the next episode in season 2. We'll see you on the turf.